Have you ever felt invisible? Like your presence didn't matter because someone with a bigger name, a louder voice, or a shinier title walked in. That's exactly what happened to Daniel Reeves on what should have been an ordinary flight home. But that day, oh that day, was the spark that lit a fire no one at Western Skies Airways saw coming. It was a calm Wednesday afternoon at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The terminal hummed with the usual chaos, boarding calls echoing, wheels rolling over tile floors, the faint smell of coffee and jet fuel mingling in the air. Daniel, 48 years old, dressed in a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, dark jeans and polished loafers, carried himself with quiet confidence. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. Years of building his company, Reeves Tech Solutions, had given him a presence that didn't shout. It whispered authority. His day had been long but rewarding. In Phoenix, he had just closed one of the biggest deals of his career, a partnership worth millions. Now he was heading home to San Diego, looking forward to a quiet evening, a simple glass of bourbon and a few hours of rest. He boarded early, first class as usual, and slid into seat 1A. It wasn't just a seat. It was a small sanctuary, a corner of calm in a life of constant movement. But peace rarely stays unchallenged. Minutes later, a tall, sandy-haired man in his late 20s appeared near the galley, glancing at Daniel's seat with a sort of confidence that didn't ask for permission. It expected compliance. Behind him, a flight attendant with a polished smile approached Daniel. "Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry, but there's been a seating mix-up," she began, her tone rehearsed yet uneasy. "We need you to switch seats with this gentleman. He's assigned to this one." Daniel looked at her calmly, then down at his ticket. "This is my seat," he replied, voice even. "It's on my boarding pass." The attendant hesitated, then offered a tight smile. "Yes, I understand, but he's a frequent VIP flyer. We'd appreciate your cooperation. If you could move to seat 3C, it would help us resolve this quickly." And there it was, that subtle expectation. That unspoken rule that someone deemed more valuable deserved more space, more comfort, more respect. Daniel felt the heat rise in his chest. He had faced this sort of thing before, not just on flights but in boardrooms, in negotiations, in moments when people decided who mattered based on what they could see, not what they understood. "I booked this seat weeks ago," he said firmly, his voice carrying just enough steel to make nearby passengers glance over. "I'll stay here." The young man shifted impatiently, his arms crossed. His expression said it all, "Move. This seat is mine because I'm more important than you." The attendant pressed again, this time louder, a touch of authority creeping into her voice. "Sir, we really need your cooperation. Refusing to comply may delay the flight or lead to removal." Across the aisle, an older woman raised her voice. "Why should he move? He's where he belongs. You can't just kick paying passengers out of their seats because someone else wants it." A murmur spread through the cabin, quiet at first, then growing like a ripple on water. People were watching now. And Daniel, though calm, knew this wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about dignity. He leaned back slightly. "If that's what it takes," he said, steady as stone, "then I guess we're delaying." The standoff grew tense. The entitled passenger's smirk faltered as more passengers nodded, whispering their disapproval. Soon a ground supervisor boarded, his tone sharp, trying to diffuse the brewing storm. But the tide had turned. The cabin had chosen a side. "Stay in your seat," the supervisor finally said with a clipped tone, conceding. "We'll make other arrangements." And just like that, the moment passed. The flight continued. Drinks were served, engines roared, and the world outside turned to clouds. But inside something had shifted. As the plane soared through the evening sky, Daniel stared out the window, the reflection of fading sunlight catching the edge of his glass. He wasn't angry. Not really. He was disappointed. Disappointed at how quickly people could strip respect away from someone, how easily a voice could be silenced in the name of convenience. He thought about the young man's smirk, about the flight attendant's tone, About the fact that no one had asked him who he was, what he had built, or how much his company contributed. Not just to this flight but to the very systems keeping it running. By the time the plane touched down in San Diego, Daniel knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just a seat. It was a message. And the message had been heard loud and clear. And sometimes, the quietest passenger on the plane is the one with the loudest power to change everything. The next morning, the San Diego sun spilled through the blinds of Daniel Reeves's office. Most people would have brushed off what happened on that flight, chalked it up to bad service, maybe vented on social media, and moved on. But Daniel wasn't most people. He had built Reeves Tech Solutions from the ground up. His company wasn't just another tech firm. It was the backbone of several major airlines' operations, scheduling, crew management, maintenance systems, all running on software his team created. And one of their biggest clients, Western Skies Airways, the very airline that tried to push him out of his seat. Daniel sipped his black coffee, staring at the skyline. The words from the flight echoed in his mind. "He's a frequent VIP flyer. It would help us if you moved." The entitlement, pressure, the assumption that he would just bend. He picked up the phone and called his Mark Ellis. "Mark, I want every Western Skies contract on my desk this morning. Renewal dates, service agreements, everything." Mark paused. "Everything okay? I just need to know exactly how much power they think they have over us. And how much we actually have over them." By 8 a.m., a thick folder landed on his desk. Daniel flipped through the pages, each line of fine print telling a bigger story. Western Skies relied heavily on Reeves Tech's systems. They weren't just a client, they were dependent. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the hint of a plan forming in his mind. "We're shifting priorities," he said to Mark, who stood at the door with a cautious expression. "Start allocating our premium support resources to their competitors. I want Skylink and Horizon Air moved to the top of the list. Western Skies goes back to standard." Mark blinked. "You mean slow them down? That'll cause delays in their operations." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "No, I mean stop treating them like they're special. Give them exactly what the contract says. Not more. Not less." For a moment, the office was quiet except for the hum of the city below. Mark scratched his chin. "Do you want me to warn them?" Daniel's voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. "No warnings. Respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you demand. Let them feel what it's like when they don't get to cut the line." And so the slow ripple began. Within days, Western Skies noticed. Support tickets that once jumped to the front of the queue now waited their turn. Requests for urgent maintenance patches were politely scheduled for the following week. Their competitors, on the other hand, began experiencing smoother, faster service. Then came the calls. First, it was the operations manager. "Daniel, we're seeing some unusual delays in crew scheduling. Can you expedite?" Daniel's answer was polite but firm. "Your service level matches your contract. We're doing exactly what's agreed upon." Next, a regional director emailed. "We've always had priority handling. Is something wrong?" Again the same response. "Nothing's wrong. We're treating all our clients fairly." Weeks passed, and the pressure mounted. Flights were being delayed. Crews were scrambling. Western Skies' reputation was beginning to take hits in the press for technical inefficiencies. And all the while, their competitors were quietly climbing the ranks. Finally, a letter arrived. Not an email. A formal letter, hand-signed by the CEO of Western Skies. "We would like to sincerely apologize for the incident that took place on Flight 279. It does not reflect our values, and we deeply regret the experience you had. We hope we can rebuild our relationship." Daniel read it once. Then set it down. The apology had come, not when it mattered, not when he was being disrespected, but when the consequences hit their bottom line. At dinner that night with a close friend, Daniel recounted the story. "They thought they were protecting a VIP," he said, swirling the ice in his glass. "What they didn't realize was that I was the one keeping their planes in the sky." Respect isn't about titles or perks. It's about how you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you. The friend raised an eyebrow. So, what's next? Revenge. Daniel shook his head. Not revenge. Balance. I didn't hurt them. I just stopped holding them up. And deep down he knew. This was never really about a seat. It was about a moment. A moment where someone decided his worth for him. And got it terribly, terribly wrong. The weeks turned into months, and the quiet storm Daniel Reeves had set in motion began to show its full force. Western Skies Airways, once proud of their impeccable first-class service, was now facing an operational crisis. Flights were late. Passengers were complaining. Shareholders were demanding answers. In their boardroom, tension crackled like a live wire. Executives argued about why their once reliable systems were now moving at a snail's pace. Some blamed new policies, others pointed fingers at their own staff. But one name kept surfacing: Reeves Tech Solutions. By the time they pieced it together, the damage had been done. Two rival airlines, Skylink and Horizon Air, had already signed long-term premium contracts with Daniel's company. Their flights were running smoother, faster, and were now winning over high-value passengers that Western Skies used to attract. One afternoon, Daniel's assistant stepped into his office holding a large envelope. "From Western Skies," she said softly. Inside was an offer, double the previous contract value, and a handwritten note from their CEO. "Daniel, we made a terrible mistake. The incident on Flight 279 never should have happened. We want to make this right. Please reconsider our partnership." Daniel stared at the letter for a long moment. His fingers drummed on the desk. The offer was tempting not because of the money, but because of what it symbolized. Desperation born out of disrespect. But this wasn't about getting even. It never had been. It was about a principle. He picked up a pen, signed the envelope, and wrote just 3 words on the note before sending it back. "Respect is priceless." Western Skies never got their premium deal back. They kept their basic contract. Nothing more, nothing less. And slowly, they rebuilt their reputation, this time without assuming their passengers' worth by status or privilege. That winter, Daniel sat by the window of his home, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching planes cut across the sunset. A friend beside him asked quietly, "Do you ever feel bad? You cost them millions." Daniel shook his head. "No, they cost themselves millions. All I did was sit in the seat I paid for." He leaned back, his voice carrying the weight of the lesson. People think small acts of disrespect are just moments. They pass, they're forgotten. But sometimes they're the spark that lights the fuse. A single seat became the most expensive decision they ever made. And here's the truth, my friends. Respect is not about titles, wealth, or frequent flyer miles. It's about how you treat people when no one is watching. The quiet man in seat 1A. He turned out to be the one holding the strings. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pressured to step aside for someone more important, remember Daniel's story. Stand your ground when it matters, because sometimes the quietest action leaves the loudest echo. Would you have stood your ground like Daniel? Or given up your seat? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more real-life stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your next story might just change how you see respect forever.